The distress beacon arrived already 11 hours old, stamped and time-coded by a clerk who had been dead for 9 of them. Archivist Velo Tan read the signature on the file 3 times before he understood what he was looking at, and by then, the human convoy had already crossed the border. He stood in the cold blue light of the Tassari Registry's central catalog hall, a chamber the size of a city, where 4,000 reading lecterns floated in slow orbit around a column of falling light. Every species the registry had ever met lived inside that column as a number, a weight class, a threat tier, a permission. Velo had spent 200 years adding to it. He had never once seen the column be wrong. The file in front of him said the convoy was human. The file said humans were classification grade 9, tier harmless. The file said a grade 9 vessel entering registry space without a transit writ was to be intercepted, catalogued, and absorbed under Statute 41. The file did not say what to do when the grade 9 vessel did not slow down. Confirm the tier, Velo said. The catalog answered in the flat chord the registry used for facts. Species Earth, grade 9, harmless. Last assessment, 61 years prior. Single survey contact. No weapons observed. No fleet observed. Recommendation, absorb. 61 years. Velo turned that number over. The registry measured everything, and it had measured humanity exactly once, from a great distance, through the lens of a single passing surveyor who had logged a slow ship full of farmers and gone home. One look, one line, harmless. He pulled the original assessment because he was an archivist, and the first thing an archivist did when a file misbehaved was read it from the beginning. The surveyor's log was thin. It described a single human vessel crossing the edge of registry space 61 years ago. A wide, slow hull, packed with soil and seed and tools, bound nowhere the registry cared about. The surveyor had counted no weapons, because the ship had carried none. The surveyor had counted no fleet, because there had been no fleet. The surveyor had weighed the species in under a minute, and written the word that had governed every registry decision about humanity ever since. And the word was harmless. And the surveyor had been entirely correct about the ship he was looking at, and entirely wrong about everything he was not. That was the flaw in the catalog that no archivist had ever named, the flaw Velo was about to watch swallow a fleet. The registry did not file what a species was. It filed what a species had shown it, and humanity, 61 years ago, had shown the registry a farmer. He keyed the convoy's live track, 41 vessels. He read the shapes and felt something he was not trained to feel, because the shapes were wrong for a harmless species. Most of them were soft and round and unarmed, painted in long white bands with a red mark on the bow that the catalog could not parse. Hospital hulls, clinic hulls, slow, fat, defenseless ships, built to hold people, not to fight. He looked closer at the soft hulls, at the red marks the catalog could not parse, and pulled what little the registry held on convoys of this kind. There was almost nothing. A handful of distant sightings across 3 border sectors, all of them logged and none of them understood. White ships with red marks that appeared wherever a colony burned or a station failed, or a world cried out, that loaded the dying and left, that never fired, and never demanded, and never stayed. The registry had filed them under a category it kept for things it could not be bothered to classify properly, the category for harmless traffic, and it had never once asked why a harmless species kept showing up at the worst moments in the galaxy with ships built to carry the broken home. But the convoy was not 41 soft ships, it was 40 soft ships and one other. The 40th and last contact was long and dark and unhurried, and it threw back the registry's scanning pulse instead of swallowing it. The catalog tried to weigh it and returned an error. The catalog tried again and returned the same error. Velo had administered 10 million weighings in his career, and he had never seen the column refuse a measurement twice. Identify the escort, he said. Unable. Vessel designation, partial. Hull self-reports as standfast. No matching record. No threat tier. Then assign 1. Insufficient data. Velo set both hands flat on the lectern. Around him the great hall hummed with the work of 1,000 archivists, processing 1,000 lesser species, none of them looking up, none of them aware that one file in the falling column had begun, very quietly, to be a lie. He tried a 4th time, manually, overriding the safeguards that stopped a weighing from running when the data was thin. The catalog reached out toward the dark ship, the way it had reached toward 100 million vessels across 10,000 years, and the dark ship reflected the reach back at it, unbothered, the way a closed door reflects a knock. The error that came back was not the error the catalog returned for an unknown. It was the error the catalog returned for a thing that was actively refusing to be measured, and the catalog had logged that particular error exactly twice in its entire history, and both times the species responsible had later been moved to the highest tier the registry kept. Velo erased that thought before it could finish. The file said harmless. The file had said harmless for 61 years. The catalog did not make errors of that magnitude. He told himself this in the flat, certain voice the registry had trained into him for 200 years, and even as he told himself, he watched the dark ship hold its heading toward the failing station, and he believed himself a little less with every kilometer it crossed. He opened a channel to the Convoy. He used the registry's oldest and most certain words, the ones that had ended 400 standoffs without a shot, because no species in record had ever heard them, and chosen to keep moving. This is the Tesari Registry. You have entered catalog space as an unwrit vessel of grade 9. Heave to, surrender your manifest. You will be absorbed under Statute 41. Compliance is the only entry in your file. The answer came back in human speech, unhurried, a man's voice worn smooth by long use. Registry, this is Admiral Cole Harker. Convoy escort standfast. We picked up your distress beacon 11 hours ago. We're inbound to the station that sent it. We have 3,000 patients aboard these ships, and a doctor who tells me some of them have hours, not days. We are not stopping. For a moment, Velo could not respond, because the catalog had no entry for what had just happened. In 10,000 years of records, across 400 standoffs and 1,000 absorbed species, the registry's oldest words had been spoken and obeyed every single time. Compliance is the only entry in your file. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, the way gravity was a fact. Species heard those words and complied, because the catalog said they would, and the catalog had never been wrong, and so the words had become a kind of physics, a law that held the galaxy in place. And a slow farmer species filed under harmless had just heard the unbreakable law of the Tesari Registry and answered, in a worn and unhurried voice, that some of its patients had hours, not days. Velo replayed the words. To be sure he had heard them. He had. A grade 9 vessel had refused the registry. He looked at the column of falling light, at the line that said harmless, and for the first time in 200 years, he reached out to flag a file for review. He did not get the chance to finish the gesture. Registry, the human said. Your beacon came from your own outpost. Station Merritt's End. You call it Catalog Node 6. 40,000 of your people are dying in it. You've spent 11 hours deciding whether we have the right paperwork to save them. A pause, and the worn voice went quieter, which was somehow worse. We're going to do it anyway. Stand aside, or be in the way. Stand fast doesn't slow down for either. The channel closed. Velo Tan stood very still in the cold blue light. He was an archivist, not a soldier, and he understood in that moment that the two professions had just collided inside his hall, and that the catalog, his perfect catalog, was about to learn something it could not survive learning. He had served the registry his whole life because he had believed, the way a faithful man believes, that to name a thing correctly was to be safe from it. That was the promise the institution made. Tell us what you are, and we will know how to hold you, and nothing in the catalog can hurt the one who holds the catalog. 10,000 years of that promise stood in the falling light around him. 400 standoffs ended without a shot. 1,000 species sorted and shelved and made harmless by the simple act of being known. The promise had never once failed. It had no procedure for failing. And Velo Tan, listening to a man tell him without heat that he was going to save 40,000 people, whether the paperwork allowed it or not, understood for the first time that the promise had a hole in it, the exact size of a thing the catalog could not name, and that the hole was about to be filled by a ship the registry had built its own intercept fleet to absorb. He looked at the dark ship on his board, the one the column could not weigh, and he began, too late, to be afraid of a number he had written himself. 61 years. One look. Harmless. He flagged the file. The registry, which had never been wrong, cued the flag behind 11,000 others and told him to wait his turn. Velo did not wait his turn. He walked the long way down the hall, past 1,000 archivists, bent over 1,000 lesser species, to the muster board, where the intercept fleet was already assembling, and he watched the institution do the thing it did best. The catalog had read the Convoy's refusal as a clerical irregularity, a Grade 9 vessel out of compliance with Statute 41, and it had dispatched the standard response without a single living mind approving it, because the response to a Grade 9 irregularity did not require approval. 31 vessels detached from the catalog node and began to move toward the corridor, projectors charging, classification locks warming, the same procedure that had absorbed 400 targets without a death on either side. The fleet did not hurry. It had never needed to hurry. A frozen thing waited for you. Velo stood at the muster board and tried to recall the procedure for recalling an intercept fleet, and found, with a slow, cold dread, that there was none, because no archivist in 10,000 years had ever wanted to recall one. The fleet went out, and the target was absorbed, and the file was closed. That was the only story the catalog knew how to tell. He looked at the 31 moving icons and the one dark icon the column could not weigh, and he understood that he was watching the opening move of a story the catalog had no ending for, and that he was the only mind in the entire hall who could see that the ending was not going to be the one in the file. Out past the border, Standfast lit its drives and went in. Dr. Mara Vale had her arms inside a Tessari child when the deck began to vibrate under her boots, and she did not look up. She was aboard the lead clinic ship Quiet Harbor, in a surgical bay built for 40 operations at once, and right now, 38 of those tables were full. The child on her table was not human. Almost none of her patients were. They had come from Station Merritt's End, the registry outpost that had begged for help into the dark, and they were the small and the old and the sick of a species that catalogued everyone else and had never once imagined needing rescue from its own kind. Vibration is the escort lighting its drives, said her assistant, a thin Earth medic named Pole who had been awake for 30 hours. We're going faster. Then so will we, Mara said. She closed the last suture, stepped back, and let the table seal a clean field over the child's chest. Next. The intercom found her before the next patient did. Admiral Cole Harker's voice, the same worn calm he used whether he was ordering breakfast or burning a fleet. Dr. Vale, I need a number. 3,091 aboard now, she said, scrubbing to the elbow. We pull more off the station every hour the corridor holds. How long do I have? That's the number I came to ask you, the Admiral said. The registry says the station has 40,000 souls left, and a failing core. They sent the distress call, and then tried to bill us for answering it. They want us to stop and be catalogued. Tell them no. I did. They're moving ships to make me. A pause. Mara, I have one warship and 40 hulls full of patients and a station coming apart. I need to know how many trips into that corridor we get before you can't take any more aboard. Mara looked down the long, bright row of tables, at 38 strangers breathing, because a human convoy had refused to read the rulebook. We take everyone who can be moved, she said. You keep the corridor open. I'll keep them alive. That's the whole arrangement, Admiral. That's the whole arrangement, he agreed, and the channel closed, and the deck leaned as Standfast pulled the convoy deeper into space that had filed humanity under Harmless. She did not tell him the other number, the one she carried alone. The station's core was failing on a curve, and the curve and the loading rate were two lines on the same graph, and right now the lines crossed at 31,000. 31,000 saved, 9,000 lost, if nothing changed. Mara Vale had spent her whole career refusing to accept the number a graph gave her. She did not intend to start now. She moved to the next table, where a Tessari sailor lay with a chest wound from the station's first explosive decompression, and she put her hands to work and let the rest of her mind run the corridor like the Admiral was running it, counting trips, counting minutes, counting the distance between the lines. Up on the warship, Cole Harker watched the registry's answer assemble itself on the long board, and he counted. Standfast's command deck was narrow and dark and quieter than any ship its size had a right to be. Harker stood at the rail with his hands behind his back An unremarkable man in an unremarkable gray uniform, the kind of face a stranger would forget in a hallway. He had commanded the ship for 19 years. In that time, Standfast had been outnumbered 40 times and had walked away from 40 fights, and the people who served on her had stopped calling that luck somewhere around the 11th. "Talk to me," he said. His weapons officer, a broad woman named Ada Brunt, read the board without inflection. "Registry Intercept Force forming up at the catalog node. I count 31 vessels. They're not warships, sir. The shapes are wrong. They've got no gun lines, no armor banding. Big projectors on the bow of each. Projectors. Catalog beams. Best guess." Brunt frowned. "They don't shoot, Admiral. They scan. They weigh. The intel from the survivors says when the registry decides to absorb something, it freezes the target's systems with a classification lock and then tows it in. 40 standoffs in their records. Nobody ever fought back, because the moment they get a lock you can't move." Harker absorbed that. A fleet that did not kill. A fleet that filed you, froze you, and carried you home to a shelf. He had fought a great many enemies. He had never fought a librarian. "They believe that works on everyone," he said. "Their whole institution is built on it working on everyone," Brunt said. "The survivors said the registry has a single word for war. They call it a clerical irregularity." A clerical irregularity. Harker let himself a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. He had read the survivor reports during the long approach, the ones the station had bled into the dark along with its distress call. They described a registry that had ruled its corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years without ever fighting a war, because it had never needed to. It did not conquer. It cataloged. It arrived at a world or a station or a ship, weighed it, froze it, and absorbed it into the falling column of light, and the thing absorbed simply stopped being its own thing and became a registry possession, a number, a permission, a line in a file. 400 times it had done this. 400 times the target had frozen, because the classification lock froze everyone, and a frozen thing could not run and could not fight and could not refuse. That was the entire foundation of the institution. Not that it was strong. That it was certain, and that certainty was a weapon nobody had ever found the edge of, because everyone who had ever faced it had been measured before they understood they were in a fight. "They've never lost," Harker said, "not once in 10,000 years." "No, sir," Brunt said. "That's not strength," Harker said. "That's a winning streak. And the thing about a winning streak is that it tells you nothing about what happens the first time you lose." He turned back to the board. "Helm, hold our heading. Dr. Vale needs the corridor, and she's going to get it. Brunt, the moment one of those projectors paints a clinic ship, I want to know which ship and which projector. And then we correct their files. The registry struck first, the way a clerk strikes, without warning and with total confidence in the form being correct. The lead intercept vessel, a pale hooked thing called by the catalog Adjudicator 12, swept its bow projector across the convoy and chose its first target by the rulebook, which said to begin with, the largest unwrit hull. The largest hull was not Standfast. The catalog still could not weigh Standfast. So the projector reached past the dark warship and locked onto the clinic ship Quiet Harbor, 3,000 patients and 1 doctor, and the whole soft heart of the convoy, and the classification beam closed around her like a fist around a moth. Aboard Quiet Harbor, every light stuttered. The surgical fields flickered. On Mara Vale's table, the seal blinked from green to amber, and a patient who had been breathing began, very quietly, not to. "We're locked," Pol shouted. "Power's draining. The fields are dropping. They're freezing us. Every system is going down." Mara did not move from the table. She put her bare hands on the seal and held it shut by main strength, and she said, in the flat voice she used when there was no time for any other voice, "Stand fast. We have a lock on Quiet Harbor. We are losing patience." 2 seconds passed. On the command deck of the dark ship, Cole Harker heard the doctor's flat voice and looked at the board where Brunt had already painted the source. "Adjudicator 12, Brunt said. "Bow projector. Bearing marked." "The registry thinks we can't move once we're touched," Harker said. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "Let's introduce them to the exception. Brunt, The projector only. Not the hull. They sent a librarian. I want them to understand. We read the whole book. Standfast fired for the first time. The dark ship did not flicker, did not freeze, did not even slow. The classification beam that had locked Quiet Harbor was anchored to a single emitter on the bow of Adjudicator 12, and Standfast put one round through that emitter from 40,000 kilometers out. A single shot threaded through a moving fleet, with the patience of a surgeon and the certainty of a closing door. The projector did not explode. It simply ceased to exist, sheared off the hull in a flat, silent bloom, and the lock on Quiet Harbor died in the same instant. Aboard the clinic ship, the lights came back. The seal under Mara's hands went green. The patient who had been not breathing began again. She let go of the table, looked at her trembling hands, and said only, "Thank you, Standfast. Keep going." The whole event, from the lock closing to the lock dying, had lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, the registry had done to Quiet Harbor what it had done to 400 targets across 10,000 years, and a human warship had undone it without breaking stride, and on the surgical tables, 38 strangers had come within 2 seconds of dying in the dark and would never know it. Mara Vale knew it. She filed it where she filed everything that frightened her, in the back of her mind behind the next patient, and she moved to the next patient. With the lock broken, the first loading run went in. 2 clinic ships, Quiet Harbor and Long Morning, ran the corridor to the failing station, while Standfast held the mouth, and Mara Vale left the surgical bay for the first time in hours to stand at the lock and receive what came aboard. She had seen a great many stations die in her career. She had never seen one die like this. Slow and quiet and abandoned, its corridors full of people who had spent 11 hours waiting for a rescue from their own institution, and had received instead a demand that the rescuers stop and be filed. They came aboard in a long broken line, the small and the old and the wounded, carried on stretchers by their own kind, and by human medics who had run into the smoke without being asked. A Tassari woman pressed a child into Mara's arms at the lock, a child too small to walk, and tried to say something, and could not, and Mara held the child and said the only thing that ever needed saying at a lock like this one: "We have you. You are aboard a human ship. We do not leave people behind." She did not know if the woman understood the words. She knew the woman understood the arms. That was usually enough. 600 came aboard in that first run. Mara sent the worst to the tables and the rest to the holds, and turned the ships around and sent them back for more, and the corridor held, because one dark ship was holding it, and the lines on her graph began, for the first time, to move. There was a young Tassari medic on the station, one of their own, who had stayed behind when the rest of the staff fled, treating the wounded in the dark with nothing but his hands and a failing power supply. When the human teams reached his ward, he did not understand at first that they had come to help, because in his entire life, nothing had ever come for the Tassari except the catalog. And the catalog did not come to help. It came to file. He stood in front of his patients with his arms spread, trying to protect them from the strangers in the smoke, until the human team leader knelt down beside the nearest of his patients and began to work, and the young medic understood that the strangers were doing what he had been doing, only faster and with better tools, and that whatever they were on the same side of the line as he was, the side that did not let people die if it could be helped. He worked beside them for the rest of the evacuation, and he was the last Tassari off the station, and he never forgot what he had seen, and he told it for the rest of his life. The registry, having lost one projector, did the only thing its rulebook allowed, which was to escalate by the numbers. Adjudicator 12 fell back, and 3 more adjudicators slid forward to take its place, and they did not aim at the clinic ships this time. They aimed at the thing the catalog still insisted was a Grade 9 convoy escort, the dark ship the column could not weigh, and they tried to lock Standfast itself. The rulebook said that when a target severs a projector, the projector was faulty, and the solution to a faulty projector was more projectors. And so 3 classification beams reached across the dark and closed on the warship at once. On the command deck, 3 lock warnings lit the board and died in the same breath. Standfast did not flicker. The classification lock froze systems by reaching into a ship's power lattice and holding it, and the dark ship's lattice was built by a species that had learned, somewhere in its short violent history, never to let a thing it could not see reach inside it. The beams found nothing to hold. They slid off the hull like water off stone, and the catalog reported 3 successful locks on a target that continued to maneuver at full power and could not reconcile the two facts, and filed the contradiction under the only word it had. "They just tried to lock us," Brunt said. "All 3 at once. Sir, the board says we're frozen. We are very much not frozen." "They're reading the manual to a ship that never bought the manual," Harker said. "Take the 3 projectors. Same as before. Weapon, not hull." 3 more rounds left Standfast in the space of a breath, and 3 more emitters ceased to exist, and the dark ship held its heading toward the failing station, with 4 severed projectors behind it, and not a scratch on its paint. In the central catalog hall, 4,000 reading lecterns away, archivist Velotan watched Adjudicator 12 report the loss of its primary projector, and felt the floor of his certainty move. He had told himself the human refusal was a misunderstanding. He had told himself the dark ship's unweighability was a sensor fault. He had told himself the convoy would freeze and file and shelve like every species before it, 400 times in a row, a record without a single exception. And now Adjudicator 12, which had absorbed 11 species in its service, reported that its catalog beam had been severed at the source by a ship his column could not even measure, and that the severing had been precise, deliberate, surgical, a shot that destroyed the weapon and spared the crew. That was the detail that frightened Velo most. Not that the humans could fight. Things that could fight were common, and the registry filed them at the high tiers and avoided them. What frightened him was the restraint. The human ship had been touched, had been frozen by a lock that froze everyone, and had not frozen. It had reached out and removed the offending instrument, and nothing else. It had not destroyed Adjudicator 12. It had corrected it. You did not correct a thing you feared, you destroyed it. The humans were not afraid, and there was worse in the replay. When Velo slowed it down, the shot that had severed the projector had been fired from 40,000 kilometers away, through the gap between 2 clinic ships, with a margin of less than 30 meters on either side. The human ship had threaded around between 2 hulls full of patients to destroy a single weapon and spare the crew that fired it. And it had done so in the 4 seconds between the lock closing and a patient dying, which meant the human ship had not only the will to be precise, but the time pressure of a doctor's failing patient, and had met both at once without error. The registry had instruments that could measure the difficulty of that shot. The instruments returned a number Velo had never seen attached to an act performed by a living crew. The catalog filed it, helplessly, under the only heading it had, and the heading was harmless, and Velotan put his face in his hands. "Replay the engagement," Velo said. The catalog replayed it. 1 shot, 1 emitter, 19,000 human-occupied compartments aboard the convoy, and the dark ship had answered an existential threat to all of them by neatly removing a single beam projector and continuing on its heading without a change of speed. "Tier the escort," Velo said. "Now, override the data threshold. I am authorizing it on my seal." The catalog considered the dark ship called Standfast and returned, for the 3rd time, an error. "Insufficient data. Vessel does not match any threat profile in record. Behavior inconsistent with all known tiers. Recommend continued absorption per Statute 41. "It just severed 12's projector," Velo said. "A clerical irregularity," the catalog answered. "Adjudicator 12 will deploy its secondary projector and re-establish the lock. Statute 41 remains in effect. The convoy is grade 9, harmless." Velotan stared at the falling column of light, at the one line in it that the entire machine refused to question, and he understood the shape of the catastrophe at last. The registry could not revise the file, not would not, could not. The institution had been built across 10,000 years, on the principle that the catalog was never wrong, that classification was reality, that a thing was what its file said it was. To revise the human file mid-engagement was to admit the catalog could be wrong, and the catalog had no procedure for that, because no one across 10,000 years had ever needed one. The registry was going to keep filing humanity as harmless, while humanity took it apart, because the alternative was a thought the institution was not capable of having. "Recall the intercept force," Velo said. "On my seal. Statute 41 is suspended pending review." "Statute 41 cannot be suspended by a single archivist," the catalog said. Suspension requires a quorum of the standing order. The standing order convenes every 60 days. The next session is in 51 days. 51 days. Velo closed his eyes. He had 200 years of seal authority, and he could not stop the fleet he had helped to build from walking into a door it could not see. Then let me speak to the human commander, he said. Open the channel. I will warn him. You will warn a grade 9 vessel, the catalog said, with no irony at all, because it was incapable of irony. Of what? Velo had no answer the catalog would accept. He opened the channel himself. Out in the dark, Cole Harker took the second registry call of the day, with the same flat patience as the first. Human vessel Standfast. The alien voice was different from the catalog's flat chord. This one had something in it, something the catalog did not. This is Archivist Velo Tan of the Tasari Registry. I am the one who filed your species. I am calling to tell you to leave. We're not leaving, Harker said. Your station's still full. You do not understand, Velo said, and the strangeness in his voice was urgency, which the registry was not supposed to feel. I cannot stop the intercept force. The institution cannot revise your file in time. The fleet will keep coming because the catalog believes you are harmless, and the catalog cannot be told otherwise until a council that meets in 51 days agrees that it might be wrong. They will lock your clinic ships one by one and tow them in, and the institution will not stop, because in its own records nothing it does is a fight. You will have to destroy all of them, and I am telling you, as the one who wrote the error, that I do not want you to have to. There was a silence on the line. When Harker answered, his voice had not changed at all, and somehow that was the thing that landed. Archivist, he said. I have a doctor on the lead clinic ship, with 3,000 patients. She pulled out of your station, because nobody else would. Most of them are yours. We didn't come here to destroy your fleet. We came to empty your station and go home. Your fleet keeps reaching for the patients. So here's where we are. We are going to finish loading your people, and we are going to take them home, and your fleet is going to learn, one projector at a time, that the file was wrong. I'd rather you learned it cheap, but that's your council's choice, not mine. We don't slow down. You will have to fight 30 ships. No, Harker said. 30 ships are going to find out they've been fighting us this whole time, and only just noticed. There's a difference. Stand fast out. The channel closed. Velo Tan stood in the cold blue light of the hall he had served for 200 years, and he understood that he had just been told, kindly, by a man who would not raise his voice, exactly how the next hours would go. He turned to the catalog one final time. Begin a new file, he said quietly. Species Earth. Do not overwrite the old one. Begin a parallel record. Title it, Pending Revision. On what grounds? The catalog asked. Velo looked at the dark ship on the board, holding its heading, drives lit, 40 soft hulls in its shadow, refusing the institution as easily as breathing. On the grounds, he said, that we made a mistake 61 years ago, and it has finally come to collect. And out past the border, in the long corridor between the station and the dark, Standfast turned to face the rest of the intercept fleet, and did not slow down. The second wave of the intercept fleet came in a wedge, the way the registry had practiced for 10,000 years, and the wedge had never once been broken, because nothing it weighed had ever weighed back. 12 vessels spread their projectors across the convoy at once, a coordinated locknet designed to freeze every soft hull in a single sweep, and tow the whole catalog prize home together. Aboard Standfast, Ada Brunt read the geometry off the board, in the flat voice that meant she was working hard. 12 emitters, Admiral. They're going for all the clinic ships at once. If even half those locks land, we lose power across the convoy. Dr. Vale loses her surgical fields on every ship at the same time. Then none of them land, Harker said. Show me the firing solution. The solution bloomed across the board. 12 threads of fire from one ship to 12 moving emitters spread across 40,000 kilometers of dark, and any naval officer in the cataloged galaxy would have called it impossible, because no gunnery in record could thread 12 simultaneous shots through a moving fleet without clipping a friendly hull. The registry's whole strategy rested on that impossibility. The locknet worked because no one could break all 12 locks before they closed. Time to lock closure, Brunt said. 6 seconds. We don't need 6, Harker said. Fire. Standfast emptied her forward batteries in a single rolling salvo, 12 rounds in under 2 seconds, and each round went exactly where the dark ship had decided it would go. The convoy did not so much as scratch its paint. 12 registry emitters ceased to exist in a flat, silent ripple across the wedge, sheared off at the mount, projectors and nothing else, and the locknet died before a single thread of it touched a clinic ship. The wedge, which had no procedure for the loss of all 12 projectors at once, did the only thing its catalog allowed. It reformed and reached again, because the file said the target was harmless, and a harmless target could not have done what had just been done, so the wedge concluded it had not happened. They're coming again, Brunt said, and for the first time there was something close to wonder under her flatness. Sir, they just lost every weapon they brought, and they're lining up to do it again. It's like they can't see it. They can't, Harker said. Their own rules won't let them. A thing that's certain doesn't learn. It just gets louder. He watched the wedge reform on the board, 12 ships realigning around the gap where their projectors had been, deploying their secondary emitters, reaching again with exactly the same geometry that had just failed. There was something almost terrible in it. The discipline of a fleet that could not admit it had been beaten, because admitting it would mean admitting the file was wrong, and the file could not be wrong, so the loss had not happened. So the only thing to do was try the same thing again and expect a different result. He had fought enemies who learned. He had fought enemies who adapted faster than he could, who studied standfast and changed their tactics, and made him earn every kilometer. Those enemies had frightened him. This one did not frighten him. This one only made him tired, because he could see exactly how the next hour would go, and he could see that the registry could not, and the distance between those two kinds of sight was the whole of the day's cruelty. Brunt, hold the line off the convoy. Dr. Vale, status. Aboard Quiet Harbor, Mara Vale was on her knees beside a Tasari elder, whose heart had stopped when the lights flickered during the first lock, and started again when they came back. She had it going now, slow and stubborn under her hands. She did not look up to answer the Admiral. 3,412 aboard, she said. We pulled another 300 off the station while you were breaking their wedge. The corridor's holding. Keep it holding. How many left on the station? 36,000, she said, and the number sat between them like a stone. Their cores failing faster than we're loading. Admiral, I need more time, and I need the docking corridor wider. Right now I can run 2 clinic ships up to the station at once. If I could run 6, we'd cut the time by 2/3. You'd be exposing 6 soft hulls in the open at the station mouth, Harker said, with 30 registry ships still in the fight. Yes, Mara said. She finished with the elder, sealed the field, stood, and finally looked up at the nearest pickup with her bloodied gloves still on. And you're going to keep all 30 of them off me while I do it, because that's the whole arrangement, Admiral. I keep them alive. You keep the corridor open. Widen it. There was the smallest pause on the line, and then the worn voice, and it might almost have held warmth. Run your 6, Doctor. Standfast will hold the mouth. Nothing gets through to you. You have my word, and you have the ship. I've never needed the word, Mara said, already turning back to the tables. I've got the ship. She gave the order, and 6 clinic ships peeled out of the convoy's shadow and ran for the station mouth in a loose line, fat and white and slow, and Mara Vale watched them go on the bay's small repeater screen, with her hands already moving on the next patient. She had served on convoys for 22 years. She had seen them run from things that filed people, and things that ate people, and things that simply did not care whether people lived. She had buried colleagues who ran too late, and patients who could not be reached in time, and she had learned the single hard law of her profession, which was that the corridor was everything, that medicine could do nothing for a patient it could not reach, that the difference between a doctor and a mourner was almost always a question of who held the door. Today the door was being held by one ship. Mara had never in 22 years trusted a single hull to hold a corridor against a fleet. She trusted this one. She did not examine why, because there was no time. But somewhere under the work, it was because the man who commanded it had answered every question she had asked, with a number and not a promise. And Mara Vale had buried too many people who died on promises to trust anything else. What happened at the station mouth over the next 40 minutes did not appear in the registry's records as a battle, because the registry had no file for it. It appeared, much later, in the parallel record Velotan had ordered, under a heading he coined himself, because none of the institution's 10,000 years of language fit. 6 clinic ships ran the open corridor to the failing station, fat and white and defenseless, their red bow marks bright against the dark, and the registry fleet reached for them with everything it had left, and between the soft hulls and the reaching fleet stood one dark ship that the catalog could not weigh, and the dark ship did not let a single lock land. Standfast moved like nothing the registry had ever weighed, because the registry had never weighed a thing that chose its own ground. It put itself between the station mouth and the fleet, and it stayed there, and every time a registry projector swung toward a clinic ship, Standfast removed the projector, not the ship, the projector. Round after round, threaded through the open corridor, while 6 defenseless hulls docked and loaded and undocked beneath the fire, and not one round so much as brushed a white hull, and not one registry crew died, and not one lock closed. Then the registry tried something the catalog had not done in 3,000 years, because 3,000 years ago had been the last time a target refused to freeze. Adjudicator 4, its projectors gone, broke from the wedge and ran straight for the clinic ship Calm Water under hard drive, not to lock it, but to grapple it, to physically seize the soft hull and tow it in by main force, the oldest and crudest method in the registry's records, and the only one left to a ship whose certainty had been shot off its bow. It was a desperate move from an institution that did not know how to be desperate, and it nearly worked, because Calm Water was slow and full and could not run. Adjudicator 4 is going for Calm Water, Brunt said. Physical grapple. Sir, if it gets a line on her, it can drag her out of the corridor before we can stop it without killing the crew. Then we stop it without killing the crew, Harker said, and his voice did not change. Helm, put us across its bow. Brunt, take its drive cowling. Not the reactor, the cowling. I want it dead in the water, not dead. Standfast crossed 40,000 kilometers in the time it took the registry ship to commit to its run, slid across Adjudicator 4's bow, and put 3 rounds through the housing of its main drive, with the same surgical patience it had spent on the projectors. The registry ship's drive went cold. It coasted past Calm Water, close enough to read the markings on its hull, and could not reach her, could not turn, could not do anything but drift, crippled and alive, its crew unharmed, and its mission ended, while the clinic ship it had tried to seize loaded 600 more souls and ran for home untouched. There was a gunner aboard Adjudicator 7, a registry crewman of 40 years, who had spent his whole career operating a classification projector and had never once been fired upon, because the things the registry weighed did not fire back. He watched the dark ship sever Adjudicator 4's drive and spare its crew, and he understood, before his commander did, before the catalog did, that he was alive only because the human ship had decided he should be. He had aimed his own projector at the clinic ship Quiet Harbor 4 times that hour. 4 times the dark ship could have answered by ending him, and 4 times it had taken his projector instead and left him breathing. He sat at his dead console with his hands shaking and thought about what kind of enemy spends a battle deciding, over and over, not to kill you, and he could not file the thought, because the registry had no drawer for it, and that was the moment the institution lost him, the moment one of its own gunners stopped believing in the catalog and started believing in the thing the catalog could not name. The clinic ships docked and loaded under fire, and undocked and ran back down the corridor, and then ran up it again, 6 at a time, trip after trip, and the wall of one dark ship stood between them and the fleet the entire time. Every soul that came off the station came off because a human warship had decided, round by round, that the registry's certainty was less important than a Tessari child's next breath, and had enforced that decision with a gunnery so exact that the registry's own instruments could not credit it. The registry vessels began, slowly, to run out of projectors. Adjudicator 12, which had started the day, lost its secondary emitter to a shot that arrived before its crew had finished aiming. Adjudicator 9, reaching for the clinic ship Long Morning, found its projector gone, and the beam dead in the same instant. One after another the catalog ships extended their certainty toward the convoy, and one after another the certainty was severed at the source, cleanly, patiently, without a single death, by a ship that the fleet's own instruments insisted was harmless. Somewhere in the middle of the 40 minutes, the intercept fleet did the thing a frightened institution always does, which is to call for more of itself. The catalog dispatched a request to the nearest registry way station for reinforcements, for heavier adjudicators, for the rarely used vessels that carried not one projector, but a battery of them, and the request went out over the catalog's certain channels with the full confidence of an institution that had never once needed help and assumed help would solve the problem. It would not. Velotan understood that before the request had finished sending, more projectors against a ship that severed projectors was not a solution. It was a longer version of the same defeat. He could see, laid out on the board in front of him with the clarity of 200 years of reading files, exactly how it would go. The reinforcements would arrive. They would deploy their batteries. The dark ship would sever the batteries, weapon by weapon, without killing a soul, and the reinforcements would join the broken fleet in the dark, and the only thing that would have changed was the number of registry ships that had learned, the hard way, what the file should have told them. The catalog was not fighting a battle it could lose. It was fighting a battle it could not understand, which was worse, because a battle you cannot understand, you cannot end, and the convoy would keep loading patients until the station was empty, no matter how many ships the registry threw into the dark. He canceled the reinforcement request on his own seal. The catalog asked him why. He did not answer, because the only true answer was that he was trying to keep the number of ruined adjudicators as small as he could, and the catalog had no field for mercy toward its own fleet, and would have flagged the sentiment as an irregularity. In the central hall, Velotan watched 26 projectors die in 40 minutes, and understood that he was witnessing something the galaxy would spend 1,000 years trying to file. The humans were not winning a battle. They were conducting a demonstration. Every severed projector was a sentence in an argument, and the argument was simple and merciless and kind all at once. It said, "We can reach any of you, at any moment, and choose not to kill you." It said, "Your whole fleet has been firing on us for an hour, and we have not lost a patient or a crewman." It said, "The only thing standing between your sailors and the end is the restraint of a species you filed as harmless, and that restraint is a choice, and it is ours, and you do not get a vote." They are not destroying the fleet, the catalog observed in its flat chord. Casualties among registry crews, 0. The escort's conduct remains inconsistent with all hostile tiers. Recommend continued absorption. The convoy is grade 9. Stop, Velo said. The convoy is grade 9, harmless. Stop saying it, Velo said, and for the first time in 200 years, an archivist of the Tessari registry raised his voice inside the central hall, and 4,000 reading lecterns went still, and 4,000 lesser species froze in their processing as the catalog logged the irregularity. It is wrong. The file is wrong. I wrote it, and it is wrong. Look at what it is doing to us. Look. The catalog looked, because he had ordered it to, and it reported what it saw without understanding it. The escort has severed 26 classification projectors in 40 minutes, with 0 loss of registry life. The convoy has loaded 11,000 additional souls from the station during the engagement. The escort has not pursued any fleeing vessel. The escort has not fired on any hull. The escort holds the station mouth and permits the rescue to continue. A pause that the machine did not intend as a pause. Query. If the escort can destroy the fleet, and does not, what is the escort doing? It was the first true question the catalog had asked in 10,000 years, and Velotan answered it in a whisper. "It is waiting for us to understand," he said, "and we are running out of projectors before we run out of pride." On the command deck of the dark ship, Cole Harker watched the registry fleet hang at the edge of the corridor, half-blinded, its certainty in pieces, and he did not press the advantage, because pressing the advantage had never been the point. "They've stopped reaching," Brunt reported. 26 emitters down across the fleet. The ones that have any projectors left are holding them back. They're just sitting there, Admiral, watching us load. "Then we load," Harker said. "Dr. Vale, how many?" 15,000 aboard, came the answer, ragged with exhaustion, fierce with it. 21,000 still on the station. Cores at the edge. "Admiral, if they let us run all 40 clinic ships at once, we empty that station before it fails." If they reach for us again, we lose the people still inside it. Harker looked at the broken fleet, at the half-blind ships holding their last projectors back, at the alien archivist's warning still sitting in his ears. We made a mistake 61 years ago, and it has finally come to collect. Open the channel to the archivist, Harker said, the one who tried to warn us. And when it opened, he spoke not to the catalog, but to the one mind in the institution that had learned to be afraid. Archivist Tan, your fleet has stopped firing. I'd like to keep it that way. I'm going to run all 40 of my ships up to your station to finish the evacuation. 21,000 of your people are still inside it. I need a clear corridor for 30 minutes. Give me that, and nobody on either side has to learn anything else the hard way. And in the central hall, the archivist who could not revise the file reached, instead, for the one authority a single seal still carried, and made the only choice the institution had left him. I cannot give you a clear corridor, Velotan said. Statute 41 is still in force. The fleet will obey the catalog, not me. But I can take the catalog away from the fleet. On the command deck of Standfast, Cole Harker went very still. Explain. Every adjudicator in the intercept force draws its targeting from the central catalog, Velo said. The catalog tells them what you are. The catalog says grade 9, harmless, absorb. While they are connected to it, they will keep reaching for your clinic ships, no matter how many projectors you sever, because the file orders them to, and the file cannot be wrong. But I am an archivist of 200 years standing. I have the seal to take the central hall offline for maintenance. If I do, the fleet loses its instructions. They will not know what you are. And a registry ship that does not know what a thing is forbidden by its oldest law to touch it. You'd blind your own institution. I would silence it, Velo said, for 30 minutes, long enough for you to run your 40 ships. It is the only thing I have, human. Take it, or do not. Why? Harker asked. It was the first question he had asked all day that was not about the corridor. You filed us. You built the rule. Why break your own institution to help us empty a station you'd already written off? There was a silence from the cold blue hall. When Velo answered, 200 years of certainty had gone out of his voice, and something older had come into it. Because I have watched you for 3 hours, he said, and in 3 hours, you have had 40 chances to destroy my fleet, and you have taken none of them. You sever the weapon and spare the hand. You loaded 11,000 of my people while we fired on you. You are the most dangerous thing the catalog has ever failed to weigh, and you have spent the entire day proving that the danger is a door you choose not to open. I have spent 200 years deciding what species are. I find, at the end of it, that I would rather be ruled by your restraint than by my own catalog's pride. Hold your fire, Admiral. I will take the hull down. Run your ships. The channel held open. Harker looked at Brunt, who had heard all of it, and Brunt looked back, and for once there was nothing flat in her face. Dr. Vale, Harker said, get all 40 clinic ships ready to run. We're about to have 30 clear minutes, and not 1 second more. When the registry goes dark, you go in. Everyone who's left, all of them. Understood, Mara said, and on Quiet Harbor she was already moving down the row of tables, sealing fields, calling the evacuation order ship to ship, her voice carrying down 40 hulls. All ships, this is Vale. Full run to the station on my mark. We empty it. We leave no one. 21,000 souls and 30 minutes. Move like it. In the central hall of the Tassari Registry, Velotan walked to the base of the falling column of light, the great spine of the catalog, 10,000 years of certainty pouring down through the dark. He set his hand against the maintenance seal, the one no archivist had used in living memory, because no archivist had ever wanted the catalog to stop, even for a moment, even to clean it. Confirm, the catalog said. Maintenance suspension will sever all field connections to the intercept fleet. The fleet will be unable to classify any target. Statute 41 will be unenforceable for the duration. This action is logged under your seal. Confirm. Confirmed, Velo said. The seal asked him to confirm again, because what he was about to do had no precedent, and the catalog required precedent for everything. He confirmed again. He thought of the standing order, the council of senior archivists that met every 60 days, and that alone could revise a file. And he thought of how they would judge him when they convened in 51 days, and found that a single archivist had taken the entire catalog offline in the middle of an absorption and let a Grade 9 convoy walk away with 36,000 cataloged souls. They would strip his seal. They would file him, probably, under some heading for archivists who had failed the institution. He found, standing at the base of the falling light with his hand on the maintenance seal, that he did not care, and that the not caring was itself the most frightening thing that had happened to him all day, because it meant the human ship had changed him too, had reached past his certainty the way it had reached past the lock on Quiet Harbor, and severed something at the source, and spared the rest. Query, the catalog said, and asked its second true question in 10,000 years. Why? Velotan looked up into the falling light, at the line in it that still said harmless, the error he had written 61 years ago from one distant look at a slow ship full of farmers. Because the file is wrong, he said, and I am the only one of us who can see it, and if I cannot make the catalog admit the truth, I can at least stop it from killing 21,000 of our own people to defend a lie. Suspend. He pressed the seal, and the falling column of light, the heart of the institution that ruled by classification, the catalog that had never once been wrong, went dark. Across the intercept fleet, 30 registry vessels lost their instructions in a single instant. The adjudicators did not know what the convoy was anymore. The dark ship at the station mouth, the 40 soft hulls behind it, the whole impossible rescue. All of it dropped out of the catalog's certainty and became, to the fleet, an unknown. And the oldest law of the Tessari Registry, older than Statute 41, older than the catalog itself, the first law written when the first archivist learned what it cost to touch a thing you could not name, spoke through every silent ship at once. What is unclassified shall not be approached. The fleet stopped reaching. The projectors that remained powered down. 30 vessels that had fired on the convoy for 3 hours went still and dark and waiting, forbidden by their own deepest rule from touching a thing the catalog could no longer name. The corridor opened. They've gone dark, Brunt said, almost a whisper. All of them. The whole fleet just stood down, Admiral. The archivist did it. He took the catalog away from them. Dr. Vale, Harker said, now. All ships run, 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 Mara called, and 40 clinic ships broke from formation at once. Fat white hulls with bright red marks pouring into the open corridor toward the failing station. And not one registry projector reached for them, because the fleet no longer knew what they were, and could not touch what it could not name. What followed was not a battle. It was the largest evacuation in the catalogued galaxy's record, conducted in 30 minutes, under the dark gaze of a fleet that had been forbidden to interfere by the one archivist brave enough to turn off the truth. Aboard the darkened intercept fleet, the crews sat in the silence where the catalog's voice had always been, and for the first time in their lives, they had to decide what to do without being told what a thing was. The commander of Adjudicator 1, the lead vessel, a registry officer of 300 years who had absorbed 19 species in her service, watched the human clinic ships pour past her dead projectors toward the failing station, and reached, by instinct, for the order to engage. There was no order to give. The catalog was dark. She did not know what the convoy was, and the oldest law of her institution, the law that had kept the registry alive for 10,000 years, the law that came before Statute 41, and before the catalog itself, held her hands at her sides. What is unclassified shall not be approached. She watched a species she could no longer name save 36,000 of her own people, and she did not lift a finger to stop it, and somewhere in the 300 years of certainty behind her eyes, something quietly broke and did not mend. Later she would say that it was the worst moment of her life, and the most necessary, and that she had spent 3 centuries believing the catalog kept her safe, and learned in 30 silent minutes that it had only kept her certain, and that the two were not the same thing, and never had been. 40 clinic ships docked at once along the failing station's whole length. Aboard each of them, the human crews and the medics and the volunteers worked at a speed that would later become a story the Tessari told their children, hauling the sick and the small, and the old and the dying, out of the dark and into the white hulls with the red marks. 21,000 souls in 30 minutes, more than 700 lives a minute, hand over hand, over hand. Mara Vale ran the whole thing from Quiet Harbor's surgical bay without stopping moving, a doctor turned conductor, calling ship to ship, balancing the load, sending the worst cases to the ships with the most open tables, refusing to lose a single one. The station was a wreck by then, its corridors smoke and failing light, its gravity stuttering, its core counting down behind every wall. The Tessari aboard it had spent 11 hours waiting for a registry rescue that never came, because the registry did not rescue, the registry cataloged, and a failing station was simply a possession depreciating in value. What came instead were human stretcher teams in the smoke, moving fast and saying little, carrying the old and the small out of the dark with a competence that the Tessari survivors would describe, for the rest of their lives, in the same baffled, grateful words. They did not ask who we were. They did not check our tier. They did not weigh us. They just came in and got us out. A Tessari dock supervisor, the senior surviving officer on the station, met the lead human team at the main lock and tried, out of 10,000 years of habit, to present credentials, to be classified, to establish his standing so the rescue could proceed in proper order. The human leading the team, a young medic with soot on her face, looked at the offered credentials and did not read them and said only, "How many can still walk, and where are the ones who can't?" And the dock supervisor understood, in that moment, that he had spent his whole life inside an institution that asked, "What are you?" before it asked, "Are you hurt?" And that the species the institution had filed as harmless had the order exactly the other way around, and that the difference between the two orders was the difference between a catalog and a rescue. On Standfast's command deck, Cole Harker watched the clock and the loading count and the core readings and held all three in his head at once, the way he had held the impossible in his head 40 times in 19 years. 30 minutes was not enough. He had known it was not enough when he asked for it, and he had asked for it anyway, because more than 30 minutes was more than the archivist could give, and a man took the door he was offered and made it wide enough by main will. He had the helm hold Standfast exactly where it could shield any clinic ship at the station mouth and reach any point along the failing hull, a position no single ship should have been able to hold, and he held it, because the alternative was a number Mara Vale would have to carry, and he had decided some time ago that he would carry the ship's burdens, so the doctor only had to carry the patients. "Talk to me about the core," he said. "Failing faster than the archivist's estimate," Brunt said. "It was never built to be pushed this hard. We've got minutes, not the 30 he promised. Maybe 28, maybe less." "Then we load like it's 25, Harker said. "Dr. Vale, push your tempo. We don't have the time the registry thinks we have." Mara Vale ran it all from the bay, and the numbers climbed. 18,000, she called. 20,000. Station core's failing. I need the last run now. Last ship, last run, go. The station's failing core gave its first warning shudder at 28 minutes. The last clinic ship, Long Morning, was still docked with 400 souls left to load. "Core breach in 90 seconds, Brunt read off the board. "Long Morning's still on the station. She won't undock in time, Admiral. She'll be inside the corridor when the core goes." Cole Harker looked at the board, at the last soft hull, and the 400 souls, and the 90 seconds, and he did the thing he had done 40 times in 19 years, the thing the convoy had stopped calling luck. "Helm, put Standfast between Long Morning and the core," he said. "We shield the undock. Brunt, when she breaks, we break with her. Dr. Vale, tell Long Morning to take her time, and take all 400. Standfast has the door." And the dark ship that the catalog could not weigh slid in against the failing station, put its weathered gunmetal flank between 21,000 rescued souls and the dying core, and held the door, while Long Morning loaded her last 400, and when the station's core finally let go, Standfast was already turning, already shielding, already pulling the last clinic ship out of the corridor in its own shadow, and the breach broke against the dark ship's hull, and the dark ship did not slow down. When the light faded, 40 clinic ships were clear of the corridor, with 36,000 souls aboard, and the station was gone, and Standfast came out of the breach whole and unhurried with the last hull safe in its shadow, and the registry fleet sat dark and silent and forbidden, watching a thing it could no longer name carry away the people it had been too proud to save. In the central hall, Velo Tan brought the catalog back online, and the falling column of light returned, and the first thing the catalog did was demand to know what had happened to the station. Query, it said. Catalog node 6 no longer responds. Status. Gone, Velo said. The core failed. Casualties. Among our people, Velo said. Almost none. They are alive. They are aboard the human convoy. All 36,000 of them. He looked up into the light. Because of the species you filed as harmless. Because of the ship you could not weigh. Because for 30 minutes I took you away from the fleet, and the moment you stopped telling them what to do, they stopped killing our own people to defend your file. The catalog was silent for a long moment, processing a thing it had no procedure to process. The convoy is grade 9, it said, but it said it slowly now, and there was something in the flat chord that had not been there at the start of the day. Something that might, in a species that could feel it, have been doubt. Harmless. No, Velotan said. Not anymore. Open the parallel file. We are going to write the truth, and it is going to take us 1,000 years to finish it. The convoy turned for home with 36,000 survivors aboard, and the registry fleet did not follow, because the catalog still did not know what it would be following. Cole Harker stood at the rail of Standfast's command deck and watched the broken intercept force fall behind on the long board, 30 vessels with their projectors severed and their certainty in pieces, holding station around the empty place where catalog node 6 had been. None of them moved. None of them reached. They had spent 3 hours firing on a species they could not see clearly, and now they sat in the dark and watched it leave, and Harker found he felt no triumph at all. He felt the particular tiredness of a man who has spent a day being merciful to people who tried to kill him, and would have called it filing. They're not pursuing, Brunt said. Sir, I have never seen a fleet just let a prize walk. They're built around not letting things walk. They're built around being certain, Harker said. We took the certainty away from them. A creature that rules by knowing what everything is, doesn't know what to do with a thing it can't name. He watched the last of the fleet drop off the edge of the board. Set course for home, Helm. Standard cruise. The doctor's got 3,000 surgeries to finish, and I'm not going to rush her. The channel opened one last time before the convoy crossed the border, and it was Velotan, and his voice carried something that the catalog had never once produced in 10,000 years, which was gratitude. Admiral Harker, he said, the intercept fleet will not pursue. I have given the only order a single seal can give, which is no order at all, and the silence is holding. You will reach the border unopposed. I wanted you to hear that from me before you crossed. Why does it matter who I hear it from? Harker said, not unkindly. Because someone has to be accountable, Velo said, and the catalog cannot be, because the catalog cannot be wrong, and so the wrongness has to live in a person, and I have decided it will live in me. I filed your species 61 years ago, Admiral. One look at a slow ship full of farmers, and I wrote the word that sent 31 vessels to absorb a convoy of clinic ships, and the word was harmless, and it was the largest error in the history of the institution, and I made it in under a minute, and did not think of it again for 61 years. A pause. I am thinking of it now. I will think of it for the rest of my life. I wanted you to know that the error had a name, and that the name has chosen to carry it. Harker was quiet for a moment. When he answered, the worn calm had not left his voice, but something underneath it had softened, the way iron softens just before it bends. Archivist, he said, you're the only one in your whole institution who turned the catalog off to save your own people. That's not the man who made the error. That's the man who fixed it. We didn't come here to be feared. We came to empty a station. You let us. Go and write a better file. He paused. And Tan. The next species you weigh, give it more than a minute. You never know which slow ship full of farmers grows up into something that holds the door. The channel closed for the last time, and the convoy crossed the border into open space, and behind it, the Tessari registry began, slowly and against every instinct it had, to learn. Below, on Quiet Harbor, Mara Vale was finishing the last of those surgeries herself, because she would not hand off the final patient on a day like this one. It was the Tessari elder whose heart had stopped twice, once in the first lock and once in the breach, and who had decided, against the odds and against the catalog, to keep living. Mara closed the last suture, sealed the field, and watched the elder's slow, steady breathing under the green light, and then she sat down on the floor of the surgical bay for the first time in 19 hours, and let her hands shake. Pol found her there a few minutes later and sat down beside her without a word, and after a while he said, 36,000. We brought out 36,000. We brought out everyone, Mara said. That was the whole arrangement. How many did we lose? Total, the whole day. Mara closed her eyes and ran the number she had been carrying since the first lock flickered the lights. The number she had refused to let grow. The number she would carry the rest of her life either way. 11, she said, out of 40,000. 11. And every one of them was already gone when we reached the station. We didn't lose anyone we ever had a chance to keep. She opened her eyes. The Admiral kept every lock off my ships for 3 hours, Paul. 3,000 patients on this hull alone, and not one of them ever lost power on the table. You understand what that took? You understand the kind of shooting that is, to sever 26 weapons through a moving fleet and never once touch a patient? That's not luck. That's a ship that decided we were worth the impossible, and then did it 40 times in a row. They never even named her threat tier, Pol said. The aliens. 3 hours and they never figured out what she was. They figured it out, Mara said, and there was something almost gentle in it. They just couldn't write it down. That's a different thing. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said the thing she had been turning over since the first lock closed on her ship. You know what scares me, Paul? It isn't the fleet. It's how close it was. Not the battle. The paperwork. 40,000 people. And the only thing between them and the dark was whether one alien clerk would break his own rules to save his own kind. If the archivist had been a little more loyal to his catalog, we'd have had to fight our way out one projector at a time, while their core counted down, and we'd have lost thousands, and the file would still have said harmless when the last of us crossed the border. That's the part I'll carry, not how strong we were, how nearly it didn't matter. Paul thought about that for a while, but it did matter, he said. We brought out everyone. We brought out everyone, Mara agreed, because one of them was brave enough to be wrong out loud. Never forget that the door was held on both ends, Paul. The Admiral held our side. The archivist held theirs. We were just the only ones who happened to be carrying stretchers. She got up off the floor after a while, because there was always one more round to make, and she walked the long rows of the surgical bay, where 3,000 patients lay breathing in the green light. Most of them would never know what had happened in the dark above them, the locks and the severed projectors, and the failing core, and the dark ship that had held the door for 3 hours, and then put its own body between them and the breach. They would wake in a clean bed and be told they were safe and be brought home. And that was as it should be, because the whole point of the corridor was that the people inside it never had to see what it cost to hold it. Mara stopped at the bed of the Tessari child she had been operating on when the deck first shook, hours and a lifetime ago, and found the child awake and watching her with the wide, steady eyes of the very young, who had not yet learned to be afraid of the things that should frighten them. The child did not have the words for what it wanted to ask. Mara did not have the words to answer in a language the child could understand, so she put her hand against the field over the child's chest, where the seal glowed green and steady, and held it there a moment, the same hand that had held a different seal shut by main strength, while a fleet tried to freeze it, and then she moved on to the next bed, because that was the whole arrangement, and the arrangement did not stop for wonder. Paul watched her go, and understood that he was serving with someone who would be a story too, someday, in the same files as the Admiral, the doctor who did not lose a single patient she ever had a chance to keep, on the day the registry learned what humanity was. He did not say so. There was no time, and she would not have wanted to hear it, and there was always one more round to make. In the central hall of the Tessari registry, Archivist Velotan stood before the falling column of light and began the longest entry of his 200 years. He did not overwrite the old file. He had learned, that day, the cost of a file that could not be questioned, and he would not build another one. Instead, he opened the parallel record he had ordered at the start, the one titled Pending Revision, and he began to write what he had seen, and the catalog, which had never once recorded its own error, recorded it now, line by line, because an archivist with 200 years seal had commanded it to, and would not be refused. He wrote that the species filed 61 years ago as Grade 9, harmless, from a single distant look at a slow ship full of farmers, had entered registry space to answer a distress call the registry itself had sent, and then tried to bill. He wrote that the species had loaded 36,000 Tessari souls out of a failing station, while the registry fleet fired on it for 3 hours. He wrote that the species' single escort vessel, designation Standfast, had severed 26 classification projectors with surgical precision and had killed no one, had destroyed no hull, had pursued no fleeing ship, and had shielded the last clinic vessel with its own body when the station core failed. He wrote, because he was an honest archivist, and the record deserved honesty, the things the institution would least want to read. He wrote that the registry had fired first, that the convoy had come in answer to a registry beacon, had been met with a demand for compliance, had been struck with a classification lock before it had so much as raised a weapon. He wrote that across 3 hours of engagement, the human ship had held to a single doctrine that the catalog had no tier for, which was that it would stop the registry from harming the convoy and would do the registry no harm in return, that it would sever the weapon and spare the hand every single time, no matter how many times the registry reached, and that it had kept to this doctrine even in the final minute when the simplest path to victory would have been to destroy the fleet entirely and run the corridor unopposed. He wrote that the human ship had chosen the harder path 40 times in a row, and that the choosing was not weakness, and that the institution's failure to understand this was the precise shape of the error that had nearly killed 21,000 of its own. He wrote that the institution had been unable to revise the file in time, that the catalog had repeated the word harmless while the error came to collect, that the whole machine had nearly killed 21,000 of its own people, defending a classification, rather than admit the classification was wrong. And at the end, where the catalog wanted a tier, a number, a weight class, a single clean word to file the species under, so the institution could go back to being certain, Velotan wrote no number at all. Query, the catalog said. The record requires a classification. What tier? Velo looked up into the falling light, at the 10,000 years of certainty pouring down through the dark, and he thought of the worn, calm voice that had never once been raised, and the doctor who had held a seal shut with her bare hands, and the 36,000 who were going home because a species the registry could not weigh had decided not to read the rulebook. No tier, he said. Write this instead. Write it exactly. Approach only with help in your hands and no weapon in your reach. They will know which you carry before you do. They came when we did not call kindly. They left us alive when they did not have to. We filed them once, from a great distance, and we were wrong, and the error walked through our entire fleet without raising its voice, and carried our people home. He paused. And then write the last line, and never let any archivist remove it, on my seal, forever. The last line, the catalog said. The most dangerous species in the catalog, Velotan said, is the one that shows up to save you, and the only reason you are still alive to read its file is that it chose to be gentle, and the registry's last clerical error was believing that choice was weakness. The catalog recorded it. The falling column of light shifted, very slightly, the way a thing shifts when it learns something it cannot unlearn, and somewhere in the great hall 4,000 reading lecterns registered the change and went on with their work, and the institution that ruled by certainty carried for the first time in 10,000 years a single file it knew it could never close. Word of the day moved faster than the convoy did. By the time Standfast crossed back over the border, 3 other registry outposts had quietly logged the dark ship's passage and chosen, each on the authority of a frightened local archivist, not to challenge it. The catalog still said harmless. The local archivists had read what Velotan had written into the parallel file, and they had decided that the word on the screen and the thing in the dark were 2 different objects now, and that a wise archivist let the second one pass. This was, in its small way, the beginning of the end of the registry as it had been, the first cracks in a certainty 10,000 years deep, spreading outward from one severed file, like fractures from a stone through ice. The standing order would convene in 51 days and would spend the next several years in the worst crisis of the institution's history, not because a fleet had been beaten, but because a fleet had been spared, and the institution had no procedure for being spared, and the not knowing how to account for mercy would do more damage to the registry than any war it had ever avoided. Velotan would stand before them and would not defend himself, and they would not strip his seal, because by then, every archivist in the hall had read the file and understood that he had not betrayed the registry. He had saved it, the only way it could be saved, which was from itself. The convoy reached human space 8 days later, and the patients came off the white ships into clean wards and warm light. 36,000 Tasari, who had been written off by their own institution and carried home by a species that institution had filed as harmless. Most of them recovered. The young medic who had been last off the station stayed with the human fleet for a year, learning everything he could, and went home at last carrying not a file, but a method, the order of questions that put "Are you hurt?" before "What are you?" And he taught it to others, and it spread, and that was its own kind of revision, quieter than the one in the catalog, and just as deep. The Tasari elder whose heart had stopped twice, lived another 40 years, and told the story of the dark ship to anyone who would listen, and the story changed in the telling, the way true stories do, but the heart of it never changed, because the heart of it was a fact and not a flourish. We were dying, and our own catalog argued about our paperwork, and a stranger came through a wall of fire and did not stop until every one of us was aboard. The Tasari had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years by knowing what everything was. They learned, from one convoy and one dark ship, that there were things worth knowing that could not be weighed, and the learning of it remade them more slowly and more completely than any war ever could have. Far out past the border, Standfast cruised for home at standard speed, 40 soft white hulls in its shadow, 36,000 survivors aboard, 3,000 of them under Mara Vale's hands and all of them breathing. The dark ship had not slowed down once the entire day, and it did not slow down now, and it would not slow down for anything the catalogued galaxy could put in its path, because the people who served on her had stopped calling that luck a long time ago. Cole Harker stood at the rail and watched the dark go by, and did not feel like a legend, because legends were what other species wrote in their files, and he had a doctor to get home, and patients to deliver, and a ship that had never once failed, and never once would. Behind him, light years back, the Tasari Registry began the work of revising its catalog, and it would take 1,000 years, and the first thing every archivist would learn from that day forward was the lesson Velo Tan had written under his unbreakable seal. You cannot weigh mercy. You can only survive it. The convoy went home. The warship walked away whole, and in the cold blue hall where the galaxy was sorted into numbers, one file stayed open forever, unfinished and unclosable, a permanent warning from the institution that learned, too late, that it had once marked the most dangerous thing in the universe as harmless, and lived only because the most dangerous thing in the universe had decided, that day, to be kind.